Today's episode of the GoldCast is sponsored by our Mega Draft Recap Part 2. Oh yeah, as we promised on earlier this week, on our first episode of the week, our boy Max Marsh, he's back in the building to give us a breakdown. We went through all the potential picks, and now we're going to talk about the actual picks and what Max thinks. As you guys know, Max absolutely killed it on that last episode of the GoldCast on our preview. And now he's back to talk Niners, talk about a little bit of Bears, talk a little bit of Packers, and see how we're looking in the NFC West and the NFC North. But before we do that, Raymond, why don't you let them know where can they find us?
You can always like us on Facebook.com/TheGoldCast, and you can follow us on Twitter at @the_Goldcast. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Stitcher, all under the same moniker of The Goldcast. Like, subscribe, and comment because we certainly want to get your take on what we feel was a very productive draft this year for the 49ers, all things considered.
Oh, yeah. And then, Raymond, where can they find you?
You can always find me on Twitter at Ray Solis, that's RAYSOLIS, and on Instagram at RaySolis1. That's the number 1, not the spelling.
All right, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at I am Rudy3RD. I am Rudy3rd. All right, here we go. Our draft recap. Now we're going to go in depth into each player. We spent the first episode kind of tracking all the moves, obviously talking a lot about Trent Williams and then saying goodbye to Joe Staley. Now we're going to go into each individual player, break them down, and give you what you can expect coming up from this season from our new acquired players. Here we go. The greatest fanalist in the game. He's in the building. Me, your boy, your professor of fanalism. I'm here too. Class is in session. Let's go.
San Francisco, are you ready? This is the GoldCast.
Boom! Welcome to another edition of the GoldCast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy Solis III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Solis first, baby.
Boom! And now our special guest, our boy, he's back. Last 2 or 3 episodes, this is like Christmas for us here. Our boy Max Marsh, he's in the building. What's up, buddy?
Hey, what's good?
Man, happy draft. It was a great weekend. What did you think overall about the draft? Did you have fun?
Oh, I had a great time. My girlfriend did not have a good time. I had my phone going on the recap, all the picks, and then our TV was using her laptop to stream the draft onto the TV. So I was a living nightmare, but I was like a 5-year-old. It was the greatest day. It was amazing.
It was really nice to get some semblance of sports back. This is part of sports, right? This is part of it. Sports isn't just a competition on the field. It's also what these teams do off the field. And the draft is a huge, huge part. It's basically inaugurates the beginning of the new season. And I thought all things considered, let me ask you this. Did you see any of the NBA horse competition that they had like 2 or 3 weeks ago?
I did not see any of it, honestly.
I'm not going to lie. You didn't miss a whole lot. It was pretty rough. It lacked any sense of momentum or spirit of competition. It really just had random guys kind of just talking, and the commentators, there wasn't a whole lot that they were saying, and it was just kind of hard to follow what the point of it all was. And so that made me really nervous for the NFL draft. I thought, man, from this whole recording from home thing is not too hot. And then when the NFL draft started, I felt like I was like, this is how it's supposed to be done. I still think they should put a lot of a lot of the commentators, like at least behind green screens of some sort. But I'm kind of surprised at how often they're okay with them going like, yeah, it's all right. Just do it in your bedroom. And who cares if like half your mirror and nightstand are in the corner. Just put a football and like a jersey on the wall and you'll be fine. That's like seems to be the what they all do. Like, I'm really surprised they don't put more green screens for the overall presentation to kind of give it the look and feel of that they're in like, the press room of some sort. But overall, I thought it was pretty good. Action packed, and it felt just like the normal draft for the most part.
Yeah, I honestly enjoyed it almost a little bit more in some ways in the draft. The draft always feels like a little bit drawn out. But we did get some awesome unintentional comedy and then some truly uncomfortable, like not necessarily comedy, but just something that I had to laugh at because I was so uncomfortable, mostly with Roger Goodell just doing anything. Is too much Roger Goodell, way too much Roger Goodell.
He was all over the place. What's up with the costume changes? What was that about? Was he just getting hot? I think he was just getting hot, and he was trying different shirts on to see if he could cool down.
Yeah, but I mean, he's got millions and millions of dollars. I'm sure he can afford AC.
Right? Yeah. I actually, some people bashed it. I actually thought I thought it was kind of funny that he embraced the booing thing, and they even turned it into they had like a product sponsor behind it. I was like, you know, good, nice move, Goodell. Nice move. There's a there. If we're on the chessboard, that was a check right there. All right. I see you, Goodell. I see what you're doing here. I see the game you're playing.
The boos were fun the first like 14 times he did it. And then he continued to do it. And I was like, I get it. It's like those commercials where they're like, we're selling you something, but we're also aware that it's stupid that we're selling you something. And you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. No, I get it. I'm going to buy it anyway. I'm never not going to watch the NFL. It is immune. If I can handle, the Colin Kaepernick racism shit that was going on, I'm certainly going to be able to deal with Roger Goodell, not mentioning that he knows that people hate him.
Yes. All right, let's get into it. So, as you saw, the Niners had a crazy draft, trading all over the place. Our fantasy league absolutely had a conniption fit, as mostly led by a hated rival, Louis Bartone, who also a friend of the show, comes on the show quite often. He about lost his mind when we traded back. We traded places with Tampa Bay. I'm not even quite sure. We spoke on the phone about this. I think you and I spoke about this, where I was under the assumption that all of the lies about Joe Staley retiring were false and that it was done with the intention of coercing Tampa Bay into this move. But we saw 24 hours later that wasn't true, that Joe Staley actually did retire and that we ended up going and getting Trent Williams. But let me ask you, why do you think Tampa Bay actually made this trade? And then I want you to hear about what you think about Jajuan Kinlaw, picking him up there over Jerry Jeudy, who was a player you were very fond of and were pretty certain that if he was around at that time, the Niners were going to grab him.
Yeah, I think the trading back reminds me a lot of when the Bears traded up. And if you read anything about it, trading up is almost never a good idea. There's almost no ability to trade up, especially if it's a single spot. There's not a lot of numbers to support that decision, unless, of course, what I thought with the Bears was the Niners told them, like, somebody's looking to trade up, but we're not sure if Jajuan Kinlaw's certainly not getting past Atlanta. It's certainly not getting past most of the teams behind them, frankly, besides Tampa Bay. I feel like any of them probably would have taken them. The ones that didn't end up taking a receiver. So I feel like that had to play into it. If not, because you can't assume that an NFL team is dumb enough to be like, cool, here's a free 4th round pick. Have a good time. So I have to imagine there was something to do with but they've done this twice now that we know of, that I've, checked into my brain. They've done this twice where they've traded down a spot and gained a bunch of draft capital that they end up utilizing to get Trent Williams. So, that was a great move by them. I don't know why. Maybe Tampa Bay hates the 4th round. They were like, the 4th round sucks. I know all these guys. A bunch of people I work with, their kids are these guys, and I don't want to work with them. I don't know what it is, but it seemed like they just really wanted to get rid of that 4th round pick.
Well, I think they were trying to. I mean, I expected them to trade one or both of their 1st round picks because, like I said in the last episode, my impression was that they were going to undoubtedly find a way to get back into the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round, because not having picks in any of those rounds. And they only had 7 picks coming into this draft, one of which was acquired via trade with Detroit. So they were definitely, slim pickings this year. And if they wanted to get back to the Super Bowl, which is, of course, is the goal every year, but even more particular for them because they don't really they only lost a few pieces. So the patchwork that needed to get done, could easily be addressed in the draft because they didn't have the cap room to pick up free agents like they did 2 years ago. So I thought for sure they were going to trade back into those rounds. But when they stayed at 14 and just moved one position and got a fourth out of it, I was like, okay, we got a fourth, and we're staying into the 13th. That means, to me, perhaps the 31st gets flipped for a third or a second, and we lose that pick, and they stick with the 14th. But to me, I thought, clearly the 13th pick has a lot more weight to it in terms of what they can get for it. But I thought like just a fourth and you move down, it doesn't make any sense. But it was very clear that they wanted to fill the void of DeForest Buckner, because it's not like they wanted to lose DeForest Buckner, they just couldn't pay him. And between DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead, they're like, all right, who are we going to pick here? Are we going to pick the guy that's pretty darn good in our system, or are we going to pick the guy that just broke out and seems to not only do well in our system but thrives in our system and is far more versatile coming out of the inside and outside in playing the multiple roles that he does? Because DeForest Buckner is pure inside. Eric Armstead plays multiple positions. They move him all over the place because he just works. No matter what position he was in, he was making an impact. Whereas DeForest Buckner kind of was more of a one-trick pony. So they got Jajuan Kinlaw, and that just I was like, all right, cool. So we've got our day one starter that's really going to fill this void instead of relying on the depth and rotation pieces to fill that void. Those pieces seem like they're going to kind of, more or less be what they were this past season, and that Jajuan Kinlaw is going to be now, the newest piece to this fearsome four, the gold rush, as they call it.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I agree with you, Max. There doesn't seem to be a lot of advantage to moving one place up. Clearly, if you're switching places and you're moving down from 14 to 13 as Tampa Bay, that shows you that whoever San Francisco wants is not the guy you want. So why make this trade? San Francisco clearly doesn't want whatever guy you want, or else they would just go get that guy and they wouldn't trade with you. So it's very strange that they did it again, and once again it seemed to work into our favor. But who knows, maybe 3 years from now we'll be having hopefully we won't, but we'll be having a GoldCast episode all about what a bust Kinlaw was. But hopefully it turns out okay. But let's go back to that second question. So here we have Jerry Jeudy sitting there. It's either Jeudy or Kinlaw, which were the two guys. I remember I was saying it during our draft. It's either Jeudy or Kinlaw. I was saying it to the guys here, and we picked Kinlaw. You were extremely fond of Jeudy. What do you think about this move right here? How do you feel about it overall, given the landscape of someone from the outside looking in at the 49ers?
I think that for me, it's one of those things where sometimes you fall in love with a guy that doesn't necessarily fit a scheme as much, or another player fits the scheme or what they're going for a little bit more. And that's something I learned a lot watching this draft, and how many guys I'm like, so I guess this is sort of what they're trying to run, and this is sort of the system that they want to implement. And I think especially with Shanahan offensively, it still feels like, and especially with the addressing, we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, the pick later on, it sort of shows that what he did last season is just what he wants to do, but a little bit more effectively. That is like his dream scheme. That is something he's more consistent about going for. And especially with Kinlaw, him fitting into the system, it works pretty well, because then they kind of have 3 or 2 interchangeable guys up front, because Kinlaw can be a 3-4 end, or he can be a 3-4 tackle. He can be either one of those things. And so I think by having both him and Armstead shifting back and forth and always lining up at different places and giving their defense a little bit more of like a Swiss Army knife in terms of like, a defensive lineman, whereas with someone more like Brown, who we were looking at too, he's more of like a traditional tackle. He's not going to play a lot of end. He's going to play a lot of tackle. And so what it looks like you guys want to do is with Kinlaw, you want someone that's a little bit more of an option. He can do a couple more things. He's, and he's also he's going to be a great guy. I can't imagine a world where he's a bust. He's one of the guys that I think has a lower bust potential than a lot of other guys. I think at the very, what might be the thing is he could just end up being a light version of Eric Armstead, which isn't a bad thing at all. to have someone that does similar things to him and is an athlete and has a pretty good motor. I think that's a good call. I think especially seeing what you guys did later on in the draft, it sort of showed me more of what you guys hold in high regard offensively and defensively. And upon further review, obviously it feels like a good fit for what they're trying to do. And I think that, at the end of the day, to pick up a 4th round pick out of it and to end up getting another guy that your coach says was up for debate with Kinlaw at that pick later on in the draft, as far as coaching goes, you can't hope for anything better than that.
This whole thing came from, we don't get this player if we keep DeForest Buckner because we don't get the 13th if we give up Buckner. And we acquire that pick and then end up getting not only the 13th, but then move down to the 14th and get an additional 4th round pick that we end up using as currency anyways. That pick never got used in terms of picking a player. But the amount of mileage we got out of the DeForest Buckner trade seemed to pay far more dividends than I originally anticipated. Did you notice that? Did you take that into consideration when you saw the pick again?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think definitely the idea of addressing a need that you have with a younger pick for more years and less money is crucial. It's a crucial decision to make, and I think that for them, what it feels like for you guys, it feels like you guys were very interested and it felt very necessary to immediately attempt to get a draft pick in to fill that void, is what it felt like. It felt like right when that trade happened, you sort of had that in your mind. I don't totally know that if, because it's always best player available usually for most teams now, but I can't imagine Shanahan, even if Ayuk was a little bit higher on his board, that he would have gone with that over Kinlaw if Kinlaw was still there. I think it's a great decision. It's super necessary, and it also shows you guys maybe didn't have a lot of faith in what you had on your roster at that position. Whereas, wide receiver, I still think that Shanahan's pretty high on all of the guys that you have, whether that's warranted or not. And so I think it's more of an indication that he felt that was going to be the hole in his defense versus secondary, which I don't think there's a pick for that at 13. You could have traded down, or linebackers, or a receiver, or anywhere on the offense. It felt like he thought that was your number one hole. And there was a player that slided right around that spot that couldn't have gone much further back after that. And he kind of, it was kind of a good spot for him to go. That was right around the area he was going anyway, that 13 through 17 region. So, I think when looking back on it, it totally makes sense that that's what he would go in. But some people have different, theories on that, on, do you address a new thing and do you try and change something and pick a guy that you try to fit the system around? Or do you try to find a guy that sort of fits right into the role you want for less money, which is a good idea.
Yeah, totally.
So let's move on to that second pick we've been kind of alluding to. Later on, right here, in round 1, we get Brandon Ayuk, 25th pick overall. Again, we trade with Minnesota. Minnesota takes our 31st pick. We take their 25th. And now we have Brandon Ayuk, who surprisingly, Shanahan said afterwards, there was 2 guys on his board. It was CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk, and Ayuk was that Lamb was the one that was giving him the most competition, but Ayuk was the guy that Shanahan wanted, that this was his number one choice at wide receiver. What do you think about that pickup, and what does that tell you as far as the difference between him and Judy?
For me, and going back to the podcast too, the last one, I was not super high on Ayuk because I think that he's very much a one-note type of player. You know exactly what you're going to get with him. And, especially in hindsight, when looking at how the draft panned out, you know exactly what they want to do, and it feels like my only issue with him was that they had so many guys on the roster that do that exact same thing. And if you look back at his college career, almost all of his production was done on 3 routes, which were screens, deep routes, and real quick routes. That's everything he does. He's basically just a run after catch guy, an elite run after catch guy. I think he had 11 yards after catch on average per reception. So he's got elite production in that category. And so I feel like
Niners do love yak. They play a short yardage game.
Apparently, because and looking at it too, you're like, okay, I now know what Shanahan wants to do. That's his ideas. It's going to be an effective scheme. It's been effective, and especially having guys at receiver that do more of what he wants instead of just Marquise Goodwin, who's, healthy some of the time. He ended up shipping out for a draft pick as well. Instead of just having him who's healthy some of the time, really is just a deep ball threat. You have somebody that can do a couple more things, is a better version of that. And to get him where you get him, is good. I do think that there's no reason that they should have traded up. I don't think that there's a reason for that. I think that he could have gotten there. They must have had some information that he was going to get picked somewhere in that amount of time. But I also think that coaches grade from their own system and who they think fits the best in their system, because I don't think you'd find anybody that would tell you that he is even in the same discussion as the top three guys that we were talking about. But that's not a slight on him. That's just a slight on how, he fits maybe this system or what Shanahan envisions him to fit better than, any of the other guys, so I'm not necessarily as high on this pick as as myself, but it makes sense for what Shanahan is trying to do.
And you know what? You just sparked a question from me based on that. Oh, yeah. No, not a question, a comment. It was Miami. Miami was the team that was going to try and nab Brandon Ayuk. And so if you notice, when the Niners traded down and picked him up, Miami traded out of that spot. I think they were 28th. I think is that they were 27th or 28th. But Miami was the team that they had caught wind wanted to nab Brandon Ayuk. That was the team.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, I think teams must be much higher on him. It's just hard. I think it comes from also my aversion to one-year players now, guys that sort of blew up in 1 year after the whole Mitch Trubisky thing. I think I have a little bit of I need to see a more, a larger amount of things. I need to see what you can do outside of that. But again, he's elite in that thing that Shanahan holds in high regard, which is yards after catch. I in my opinion, I think, and this is a funny thing, I think I commented this in our little group text for our fantasy football league. It reminds me a little bit of like the Magic that year that they beat LeBron, where it just feels like there's a bunch of 3-point shooters just, standing at the 3-point line. And then you got Kittle, who's, your Dwight Howard, just catching rebounds right in the middle of the field when you need that to be the case. You got a bunch of home run hitters trying to go out there. And I feel like, it's effective. It worked for you guys last year. I just, I think that it would have been nice to have a more possession receiver that isn't just Kittle, in your offense.
Well, I think you have a couple of dynamic players there. You obviously have Kittle, but you also have the Swiss Army knife that became Deebo Samuel as he progressed throughout the season and turned what was, what I thought was a pretty typical rookie season in the early half of the season for the Niners, and then became a bona fide number 1, number 2 receiver in that offense, and also became an integral part of the running game, not only blocking or not only coming out of those jet sweep running plays, but also doing some blocking downfield and acting as a decoy too, because teams were also anticipating him in the latter half of the season too. But Shanahan's so good at masking his plays, or having a play have a similar formation, 3 plays in a row, but then have all the motion be completely different from the previous play, and then have the play do something completely different than the play before it. And he's just masterful at that. But I also think that I think the Niners are also banking on the fact that they have versatile running backs that can also catch out of the backfield. We know that they love to do that. Dwelly stepped in for Kittle at certain parts of the season and proved to be a fairly reliable receiver, albeit not as dynamic as George Kittle, obviously, but someone that can be utilized as well. Kyle Juszczyk also seemed to get more attention in the latter half of the season, and he's got great hands and also did that, and he's got incredible strength despite not looking like, your Mike Allstotts or even your Tom Rathmans of the league, but does possess a lot of unassuming power, and also just has good hands too. So I think you got some pieces there. I think they're hoping that some of the pieces that they acquired last season, like Jalen Hurd, can develop into something, a player that has multi he's versatile. Not only is he a receiver, but he was a running back. So they're hoping that, you have a player there who, if he can stay healthy and develop correctly, can also become another Deebo Samuel-like weapon where he's used in multifaceted roles. Although, and Brandon Ayuk, who knows? This coaching staff likes to use players in all kinds of different ways. Although Brandon Ayuk I think he falls more in the category of some of the players that are more or less, just receivers and that's it. Like your Kendrick Bournes and your, Trent Taylor before he got injured. And who else? There's Dante Pettis, before he just started to fall out of favoritism with Kyle Shanahan from just not being productive. But those guys don't really see much versatility outside of their primary roles, and I think that's just because that's just who they are. And so perhaps Brandon Ayuk can be something like that, but only better than those players. But we'll have to wait and see. But I'm kind of, I don't know these players as well as you, Max, which is why you're here. But but obviously we have a little bit of a closer eye on, what the Niners do with their players. And so I'm kind of hoping that the coaching staff molds him into something more than perhaps what he's perceived as right now.
Yeah, I think Shanahan's a great coach. He single-handedly is going to help out my franchise by getting LaFleur a head coaching job somewhere so he can do a shitty version of what Shanahan does. So I appreciate him for that. He's now in that that Sean McVay mold where they're just anybody that's ever touched him is going to be a head coach somewhere. And so, that's a good sign for the head coach. It's a good sign for the head coach. And he's great at what he does. And I think he fits the scheme that they're trying to run. I think it's going to be very interesting because I think that what we saw with Lamar Jackson isn't just a thing for Lamar Jackson for 1 year. And I don't think it's just a thing for the Ravens. And I don't think what the Niners are doing is going to go away. I think that we're heading more to everyone's thinking pass offenses and everything's pass heavy. But there's a way to create that same type of system with running the ball and with, fast, quick receivers on the outside. And I think the Niners are really pushing the boundaries of that. And I think that's really cool. And I'm super excited to see. And Brandon Ayuk also, just for you guys, is going to be a great returner. You guys are going to love him as a return man. So no matter what, he'll always be productive in that aspect. And I just think for the system, he's a good fit for what I believe they're trying to do. And it makes more sense because, when you look at what Jerry Jeudy did, he ran a lot out of the slot too. And I thought he could still focus on the outside as well. But especially with the slot, you don't want to necessarily have him getting in the way of Kittle, who's running a little bit more on the inside as well. So it just makes a lot of sense. And I get what they're trying to do. I just wish they didn't trade up for it.
There you go. All right. So we don't need to talk about Trent Williams. His resume speaks for himself. Let's move on to rounds 5, 6, and 7. So after in the mid-draft, once we traded and we received Trent Williams from Washington, we then went and got Colton Mcgibblets from West Virginia, 153rd overall. Are you familiar with him? We traded via Matt Breida to acquire this pick for Colton Mcgibblets. How did you feel? Are you familiar with him? That's number one.
Offensive linemen are a little bit more, I'm a little bit rougher on. I think that offensive linemen so heavily, you'll even see it later on in drafts too. You'll see guys not on other teams' boards being picked up. So much of them are projections. It's harder to tell than others. So offensive line, I'm still working on my ability to read their steps, even though I was an offensive lineman myself. So, I got to work on trying to figure out why I was so shitty.
Yeah, Colton. I kind of figured that would be the answer. Colton Mcgibblets. I feel like we're really just looking for depth at O-line, and me, that's probably the one place the 49ers could choose every year ad nauseum, and I never get tired of it. I know that they're never sexy picks, but you could just go O-line, O-line, O-line every year, and I'm happy. Versus I don't necessarily need big sexy picks all the time, but I somebody to protect. The more to protect Jimmy G, the better. That's kind of how I always feel about it.
As sad as it is, as a Bears fan, I'm used to most of our offensive linemen. We've had 2 tackles that are undrafted free agents. We've had tackles that are undrafted free agents, 7th round picks, 6th round picks that have started for us for a long time. And so I'm used to seeing them. They can be productive members if coached up by the right offensive line coach. And I think for those, it's very much you have to trust in the team on what they see. And I think that for you guys, what you guys are looking at, and I know this about your tight end that you got, you guys are looking at guys that can run block. you guys are looking at more guys, create offensive line depth that can run block. That's the main focus for you guys. So if you got some guys that are, hand in the dirt, face, helmet to helmet smashing, arms hitting shoulder pads, you want aggressive run blockers. So if you guys are getting that, I think you're starting off pretty well.
Yeah, that actually leads me into the round 6 pick, which for, the uninformed, a lot of people were saying, why would we get another tight end? Why would we get Charlie Warner when we have George Kittle? And from everything I understand, and you could probably shed some more light on this, it's because of his run blocking ability. That's really why we picked this guy up.
Yeah, no, he's Warner. Warner. It's probably Burner. It's spelled all weird. So it's probably German. I'm just going out on a limb. He played at Georgia. He's been a fringe starting tight end for most of his time the last 2 years there. He had, I think, like 9 catches last year. So he's not a pass catching tight end, but he played in the SEC. So he's used to, think about it. You guys got Kinlaw, Chason, and Brown. All of the defensive linemen drafted in the first round are all in the SEC. So he's one of the tight ends that's there to block them. And he's he won some type of Georgia award for toughness there. He's he's an aggressive run blocking tight end. He can go in and pass blocking. Basically, you're looking at as like a glorified tackle tight end. You guys have had a lot of those in your time. You've had a lot of those tight ends that are just sort of bruisers that are there just to, create the line. So I like pickups like that. I think that those are underrated picks that aren't as sexy. No one's going to be getting his jersey, but you better bet that in goal line situations, short yardage situations, situations probably where Kittle's on the field as well. He'll be out there blocking. You might see him play some, fullback. You might see him in the backfield at certain times. Big guy, strong guy. I like pickups like that later on in the draft, because just because a guy doesn't get a lot of receptions doesn't mean, especially as a tight end in an offense like yours, doesn't mean that they're not going to see the field a lot, and doesn't mean they can't develop really well. So.
Yeah, I thought he made perfect sense for the 49ers. It was a head scratcher for everyone else. I'm like, nah, you really look at what this guy's bringing to the table. It makes perfect sense, and I was excited for the pick. Raymond, what did you think as far as Charlie Warner's skill set? Did you think it was a good fit for the Niners as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting huge things from some of these tight ends because George Kittle's obviously the front and center. Dwelly's going to be the number 2 tight end. This tight end was really addressing Garrett Selleck's retirement and also the departure of Toy Lolo, who's been in the league for like 8 seasons and hasn't really done a whole lot, but he did play with Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta, which is why he was with us in the first place. But, this is a player that's going to kind of sit under our 2 starting tight ends and learn a lot. I mean, you can learn a lot from a player. George Kittle's arguably the best tight end in the NFL, so he's going to gain a lot just from playing, and he's going to get some action. He's just going to get, the least of the lion's share. The Cubs share of touches in this offense.
Let's move on to our final pick of the evening. Jajuan Jennings, a wide receiver I know nothing about. We literally did not really speak about him. He wasn't even on our last episode when you were here, Max. What can you tell us about Jajuan Jennings out of Tennessee?
Jajuan Jennings, I've actually remember seeing him play a few times on Tennessee. I believe he was a super high recruit, someone that had like a lot of buzz about him, but unfortunately Tennessee's kind of like a black hole for prospects. They just haven't had a lot of good coaching lately. They don't seem to produce as well, but it's sort of a blue blood college school, so it's a little strange. But again, I think it's one of those things where in any other class, he's probably like a 3rd, 4th rounder. This wide receiver class is insane. It's an insane wide receiver class. Just going to, that's why I don't understand why the Packers didn't draft anybody, but that's not, for right now. But he's a great run after catch receiver. I think he was credited with the most missed tackles forced of any receiver in the FBS, and he wasn't a leading receiver. So it says something about his strength. I was reading up before this. Shanahan said that he could play linebacker or safety. Like, that's how big and strong and aggressive he is. And so I think, strangely enough, he fits in also with what, Shanahan wants to do, because there's one or two guys on your team that are definite possession receivers. And that's definitely what he is. He's not necessarily super sure-handed. He's a pretty good athlete. They love his tape. I liked watching him. It's hard to be the number one receiver on, a bottom barrel SEC team. But he was, good pedigree, some off the field issues, but a real good player.
Yeah, some people seem to be really high on him considering the round we got him in.
Yeah, he's got a lot of high grades.
I think it's because how far he fell in the draft, and that he ended up in the Niners' lap. So I think he was projected higher on some other mock drafts. I didn't read those mock drafts, but that seems to be the impression I'm getting from some of the experts, because he got a lot of high praise grades from the pundits in the all of the post-draft grading that often goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly what it is, I mean, he's definitely a guy that if he didn't have off the field issues would have been, in that talk of second, third, fourth round region. He's had a couple of off the field issues.
What were those issues by curiosity?
Let's see. I'm pulling up. I was reading. He was dismissed in 2017 for just, Twitter shit, posting just negative shit on Twitter, which is just never a good idea. And then as recently as January, he was suspended for stepping on a player in the last game of the regular season. So it's just like some issues like that. I think it's not necessarily forgivable, but it's like sometimes with players like him, as aggressive as he is, and as much as you love that aggression, it also shows the lack of maturity. But, we've seen players like Ndamukong Suh be like that. Sometimes the biggest, baddest guys can't turn it off at times. They don't know when to be like, hey, just harness it and just act on it later in a healthy way, in a game fashion. Take it that way. Don't go out of the bounds of the game. But, sometimes with talent like that, as long as coaches have done their homework on them and feel like they have the coaching staff and the environment to cultivate that, especially for a late 6th round pick for a guy that could have been, up much higher, I think that's definitely worthy of a shot.
Overall, where do you grade the Niners? What do you think? As someone looking out, what do you give them? An A, B, C, D, F? Yeah. Where do you stand?
Rich Eisen says they won the draft. I don't know if you stand in the same boat with Rich Eisen, but what we curious to hear what your take is.
I mean, I don't know about won the draft. I don't know if you can have a much better draft than they did with the amount of picks that they had. I think not factoring in the Trent Williams trade, it's probably in the upper mid B range. So probably like B plus ish, I would say. But with the Trent Williams trade, it's an A. I mean, you found a way to get, a replacement for your, perennial left tackle. That's, one of the better left tackles in the game with, a better left tackle, even if it is for a short amount of time, because I don't know if you guys could, not pay your starting tackle. I don't know if you can find a way to pay Trent Williams or what that whole deal is, but that's, that's for the future. That's to see where that ends up going afterwards. Especially because he wants to get paid like the best tackle in football. So that's a different thing. But I really liked your draft. I thought you addressed all the needs that you wanted. I think for me personally, how I would draft differently doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything for what I believe after watching the draft unfold, what you guys are trying to do. And especially with the picks that you were given, you handled it about as well as you could. You drafted offensive line, which is what you need. Maybe defensive back is something I would have wished you had done, which is why I can't give you an A+, because I feel like there's enough depth in the draft to be able to maybe address some cornerbacks for the future.
Rudy was very curious about that too. Same thing last season as well, and they ended up becoming the best secondary in all of football. And all of those players are coming back and are signed for this upcoming season. It's next year when that's going to become an issue, and perhaps there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. Now, I did hear this. I don't know if you are familiar with this, Max. I heard that next year's draft is going to have a lot more depth in terms of quality defensive back players. Are you hearing the same echoes?
Yeah, defensive back is going to be wild next year. There's a lot of guys. I mean, look forward to. There's more LSU defenders. Like, we're looking at all the LSU defenders right now. The best defensive player on LSU is coming out next year. There's a lot more depth defensively. It feels like defensive back is just getting better and better, even this year, which is, some might consider a down year as because there's not a lot of first round talent. But there, in the second round, there's so much talented second tier players, so many talented second tier players that are up there. I feel like we're just going to keep getting this influx of defensive backs, because truthfully, I think that with the way that, next level stats are showing us, they're the new quarterbacks. They're going to be the new quarterbacks. We've been paying edge rushers like, quarterbacks, which I still identify with, and I still think that that's a better way to go. But a lot of next gen stats are saying defensive backs are the new quarterbacks, and as we know in everything, this is America. If we know in anything, it's where the money is, which is where the talent is going to go to. And once you realize that there's a position where the top cornerback can get paid an insane amount of money, everyone's going to be playing cornerback. And I really think that there's a lot of talent this year. It just sucks because I don't know how much college football we're going to be able to see. So that's the rough part about next year's draft, is I feel like a lot of teams hoping that they're going to get enough information for next year's draft is a bit risky. And so I feel like that's my only qualm with it, is how much tape are we going to be able to see? Because there are plenty of players in this year's draft. Grant Delpit looked amazing last year, and then this year looked good but couldn't tackle anybody. He won the defensive back of the year award in college, and he couldn't tackle anybody. And so if you only see someone's junior tape, but you don't see the next year tape, you don't know how they've changed or what they've done. And so I feel like that's my only concern. But next year's going to be a great defensive back class if we can get a season going.
That's one of the feedback from one of the beat writers of San Francisco that's going on. It's like, the only thing that he could think of at this time was that the fact that all of the secondary is signed. They were number one last season, and they don't have to address any of those contracts until next year, which includes Richard Sherman. Some of them are cheap and will be easy to re-sign, like Emmanuel Mosley, but they'll also have the draft to perhaps fill the void of players that will most likely depart, either because they didn't perform well or because they did and they can't be re-signed because of cap issues, although the cap is getting extended next year too. So there is that to consider as well. But at the same time, players like George Kittle need to get paid as well. And he's going to obviously demand a pretty big contract come next year.
I would have liked to have seen them draft a cornerback as well, at least one defensive back. I agree with you, Max.
Hey, they say outside of quarterback, it's the second most difficult position to play.
Yeah, and as Max, I'm yes-anding you on that. Next gen stats, it's where the Patriots always put their money, right? They always, that's where they're willing to pay, is at corner.
That's what Seattle did for during the same time during the Harbaugh era. They put a lot of they did the opposite. They ignored the offensive line and put a lot of their cap money into their secondary, which is why they were able to stay, that defense was able to stay intact so good for so long, especially in pass coverage. Pass coverage is hard. If you have good pass coverage guys and you lock them up, that's huge.
Yeah, got them back to back. So, I agree. It would have been nice to see one player at one of the later rounds, but at the same time, who am I to question a team that just made it to the Super Bowl and was within 7 minutes of winning the damn thing,
Yeah, I think that it's hard, and especially, it feels like the Niners have been one of the few teams very active in the undrafted free agency pool. I haven't seen a lot of defensive backs taken by them yet. But I'm sure they'll find something. And, somebody said this, I forget who it was, who specifically takes credit for it. But this is the most talented undrafted free agent class that's ever existed, because there's a lot of guys that weren't given a chance to be drafted because we needed more information on them and we couldn't get it because we had less time and less opportunities for that. So I feel like there's plenty of guys that could be signed that could still be factors. I always am a proponent of addressing things before they're too late. But sometimes you'll take it too literally and then you become the Green Bay Packers. So,
yeah, let's move on. That's a great segue. So let's talk about your draft and the Packers draft. Obviously, that is the rivalry in the NFC North. Obviously, without question, the most famous rivalry in all the NFL, Bears and Packers. You've got We would love to see you knock off the Packers because we are not fan favorites in any way, shape, or form. You're the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We have a mutual enemy here. You guys started in the second round. You went Cole Kmet. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, Cole Kmet.
Cole Kmet, another tight end, which we'll get to that in a second. Jalen Johnson, cornerback. Travis Gibson, edge. Kendall Vildor, which sounds like a medieval knight that is great at murdering. Another cornerback. Darnell Mooney, wide receiver. And then you went 2 guards, Arlington Hambright and Lachavious Simmons. Overall, kind of the same thing. Like when you look at your draft, it makes a lot of sense. You're going edge, get a little bit of pass rush, help shore up the corners, and then you're grabbing yourself some more help on the line with 2 guards and a tight end. How do you feel overall about this draft? A lot of people said, hey, why didn't they grab a quarterback? But again, you do have Nick Foles over there, and we talked about this too. I think Nick Foles is really serviceable, and if Trubisky's his backup, that's probably the best place for Trubisky to be.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I like, where would they have wanted us to address the quarterback? The only quarterbacks I think are worthy of taking as an option, there are 3. The 2 quarterbacks I think were really worthy of taking as an option, both went in the first 5 picks. And then the next quarterback ended up being taken by the Philadelphia Eagles, who I thought was an awesome, crazy, weird choice. I'm so excited to see what Taysom Hill type shit that Jalen Hurts is going to do over there. That's going to be a crazy thing. But, I would have liked to have someone like Jalen Hurts, but also I feel like we're not the Packers. We're not trying to win, we're not trying to give away this season so that we can develop a guy for 4 years after we still have our quarterback that we drafted on this. And I think really what they're doing is they're betting on Trubisky and they're betting on Nick Foles. And if it doesn't work out, we have a high draft pick. If it does work out, then we can go from there, right? But I think as far as our draft is concerned, I would have loved to get a safety. It doesn't look like, at least from what I've seen of the cornerbacks that we drafted, which I like. I like our cornerbacks. I like the value of them. I love Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson's a guy that, would have been the number 3 cornerback hands down had he not had shoulder injuries, right? But injuries happen, and I think taking a chance on someone like that, he's a great press corner. Loved our value for him. Cole Kmet is the only complete tight end in the draft. He's the only guy that can block and can catch. He's a really good tight end. I think in most drafts he would have gone there. He was the only tight end I think worthy of a second round pick. Never going to be super sexy. He's going to be more of a Kyle Rudolph type of tight end. He's going to be more of one of those guys that's sure-handed. He's going to be a great blanket for one of our quarterbacks to have when they're in trouble. I still don't love a tight end. We have so many tight ends, and for them to acknowledge that we don't need 8 of the 10 tight ends we have on our roster is kind of insane, because that's essentially what they're doing. They're like, hey, this tight end is more valuable than all these other guys because he's a second round pick. And all these guys are undrafted free agents. We have 1,000 of them. And, edge is good to have. We just signed Robert Quinn, but it's sometimes I feel like people don't understand that edge rushers are like 3-point shooters off the bench in basketball. You want a few of them. You want some guys that can come in and rush the passer, even if that's their only job. Gibson was a guy that could also have gone much higher, not much higher, but 3rd round, late 2nd round, 3rd round. So that was a great value pick. The guards at the end of the draft, I don't know. Like, I was looking at them and I was looking at other people who had reviewed it, and they're like, we don't know these guys. Professionals were like, we don't know who these guys are. So there's something to it, I think. And that's why I always say, like, offensive line outside of like the top cream of the crop picks is hard to judge. The only issue I have is no addressing of safety and taking picks. Like, I would have loved to have seen one of our guards get taken. We have plenty of guards that I feel like were great options later on in the draft. Biotish out of Wisconsin was a center guard combo who had some injury issues, but was a 2nd round talent if he was healthy. So I feel like taking him where he ended up going in like the 5th round, I feel like finding a way to get someone like that later on in the draft. Addressing receiver is a good idea. I think we needed another fast receiver, and that's what we get with Mooney. He's a great fast receiver. So I feel like that's another good option to have. I actually love our receiving core. I don't feel like our receiving core gets enough credit because they have Mitch Trubisky throwing to him. No one develops random guys that you've never heard of that are late round picks like the Bears do at receiver for some stupid reason. We have great undrafted free agents that end up signing crazy contracts later on with other teams. Josh Bellamy signed a contract with the Cowboys. Fucking Cameron Meredith got paid a bunch of money by the Saints. Like random guys that were nobodies. So, I always have faith in our judgment of receivers later on in drafts. And honestly, with our franchise, I think we're great late in drafts. And so I have no reason to doubt that. It's always the early picks that I doubt. But I think Jalen Johnson is a huge win. But I'd say our draft overall probably about a B minus.
Now let's take a look at your competitor, our mutual rival here, the Green Bay Packers. In that shocking turn of events, right after the 49ers, they draft that quarterback Jordan Love out of Utah. Then they go A.J. Dillon, which is a running back. They grab a tight end for themselves, Josiah DeGuara, I think is how you say his name. Then they went in the 5th round. They went with a linebacker, Kamal Martin. Then they went O-line 3 in a row with 3 picks in the 6th round, all O-line. They went John Runyon, Jake Hansen, Simon Stepaniak, I believe is how you say that. And then in the 7th round, they grabbed a safety, Vernon Scott, and then went with the edge, Jonathan Garvin. How do you feel about the Green Bay Packers? And do you think the grades I am seeing across the board for these guys, I'm looking at some of these grades, D, C minus, B minus, D minus. I mean, they were just getting ripped to shreds for their draft. How do you feel about their draft? Even, just trying to take it from a neutral stance. Is this a big get for these guys? The quarterback is definitely weird. I don't think we're there yet with Aaron Rodgers, but how do you feel?
I feel, in a totally objective standpoint, I feel like it all hinges kind of on Jordan Love, on what that pick ends up being. People keep drawing the comparison to Favre and Rodgers, but Rodgers was, by some people's boards, the number 1 quarterback in the draft, and he slid all the way to them. And so it makes sense why they picked him in that situation. Jordan Love was pretty universally the 3rd or 4th quarterback, 3rd at best, because Justin Herbert is by no means a surefire prospect. And I think that the thing that sort of shot above draft boards is just because Patrick Mahomes is a thing. Everyone thinks that they're going to get another Patrick Mahomes. And the reality of the situation is he is a unicorn. They don't make people like that. They
100%.
Don't make people that run around like Brett Favre, but who make decisions like Tom Brady. They don't make those guys. Those guys don't exist. And, to hope that you find one in a guy that has literally the worst decision making of any quarterback in this draft is a little bit ridiculous. But if they saw something that they like and he ends up working out, we all look dumb. The only issue that I have with that pick specifically that supersedes my Bears fanness is that I don't understand what they think they're doing with him sitting behind Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is not going to be there before his contract is up. I can't imagine him going through with the whole contract. They got him no weapons. He continues to have the worst supporting cast of any quarterback not named Tom Brady, but now Tom Brady finally got one, right? And so I feel like, for me, it just seems like they're hoping that he sits behind Aaron Rodgers and has a chance to learn, but he doesn't get that opportunity. He's not really going to get that opportunity to sit behind Brett Favre for 4 years. Aaron Rodgers got 4 years, 3.5 years of sitting behind Brett Favre before he actually became the quarterback. Whereas, there's no way that he lasts that long there. And the rest of their draft, honestly, was a bunch of overdrafts. Drafting A.J. Dillon in the 2nd round, who's like a 3rd, 4th round talent, who's just a plodding, power running back in today's NFL, not a great pick. I love John Runyon. It's the son of Hall of Famer John Runyon, which I was like, I don't give a shit. I'll take him in the 6th round. So I like that pick. But I think as far as their draft is concerned, it shows it's the Packers have never been great at drafting throughout the draft. They have a lot of really good hits, and they do not do anything in free agency, which becomes an issue. So their drafting has to be on point. And I think, honestly, you guys would have a good say in this with the Packers. You're going to see a lot of, like I said, diet Kyle Shanahan stuff going on. It's going to be a lot of what you guys are doing. But, with them, they're trying to get a stable of running backs that they can use, like you guys did. They're trying to get quicker receivers, but for them, instead of getting quick guys, they just have big guys, and it's just confusing. It feels like when someone's, trying to like draw something that somebody else drew, but they don't know how to do it. So they're just kind of trying to do it by hand. And it just looks like a shitty version of what they're doing. And so I just think that the Packers kind of missed the mark on this draft. But if Love hits, it'll be amazing how much we forget about the rest of this draft.
That's true. But here's the question. Is Love going to have an opportunity to hit? Because, I mean, it's not – let me ask you this. Do you know when Rodgers' contract is up?
I believe he has 3 more years left.
Okay, yeah. I mean, maybe if he hits in 3 – 3 years, that's still a decent amount of time. But he's not going up there anytime soon. And, yeah, I thought that was a weird one, too. I thought that was a really weird one.
Especially for a team trying to win now. It feels like for a team that has so much regression opportunity, they made a huge mistake by not addressing any of their immediate needs right now. It feels like they missed an opportunity. Their defense is going to regress. Their offense is going to regress. There's going to be opportunities, and they're trying to become a more run-heavy offense, which is totally fair. You can do that if you want to, but I just feel like they need to address more. There was more that needed to be addressed, and it felt like they did a lot of stuff for the future. A tight end is not effective in their first year, almost exclusively. There are great tight ends like this year. We're going to see a lot of breakout years from Fant and Hawkinson, who did nothing really last year besides a couple of big games by Fant. Tight ends are notorious for taking a long time to develop, and they just drafted a tight end last year in the second round. Offensive linemen, maybe they'll have some depth pieces for the future. Their tackles are not lasting. Bakhtiari has never stayed healthy for a full 16 game season. So that'll inevitably happen. But honestly, I think it says a lot more about what they think of Aaron Rodgers. They're tired of his shit, because he's kind of just like if Jay Cutler was a good quarterback, and I think that's why I love Aaron Rodgers, is he's like, a good quarterback version of Jay Cutler. He's kind of a fucking dick. He's kind of a prick. and I like that. I enjoy that about him. It's fun about him. It feels like he should become a Chicago Bear, I think is what I'm saying. I think that he should join the Chicago Bears, and I think that we should try to win a Super Bowl. That's just my perspective.
Totally sign up. I want the alternate universe where he requests a trade and goes to Chicago. Who doesn't want to be there? Where Nick Foles is his backup, and you guys just get rid of Trubisky, or you send Trubisky to Green Bay. I want to be in this world so bad. That sounds amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean it's more of my fantasy world than Marvel or Star Wars or anything. Living in that world, I would die a happy man, or just be able to finally see a successful Bears quarterback, which is unbelievable.
I think Rodgers knows that his coach is also I like how you put it, a diet Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, and he doesn't like it. Because, that's the hard part, is unless you have, it's great for Garoppolo, who jumping into a situation where he's the starting quarterback and being able to do that and learning with the system and buying in right away, I think that's great. But having a guy that's, maybe the most talented quarterback of that entire generation up until Mahomes, he doesn't want to sit around and hand the ball off a bunch of times and throw a bunch of screens, and work in an offense like that. And he also, I give Aaron Rodgers credit. He knows a bad coach when he sees one. He had to deal with Mike McCarthy, who people still think is a good coach and got a job with the Cowboys and will still win games because people just gave the Cowboys a great draft. I don't even know.
And Jerry Jones, for all his flaws, he's actually not bad at working with his staff to pick good talent.
No, it's a great draft. They had a really, really good draft. They just had CeeDee Lamb, who is, the 1 or 2 best receiver in this draft, just fall to him. And they're like, what, are we not going to take him? And now offensively, if they can block it all, you're like, what do you do? What are you going to do with them? So, and I think that for them, it just happened. Like this whole draft was just them having picks fall to them and then just not shitting the bed, which, I don't necessarily know as much of a praise to Jerry Jones as it just is like, a shitting on other teams, just letting guys fall.
So let me ask you a question. If you were to give them a grade, what would your grade be for the Green Bay Packers?
I don't know. I mean, like, I feel like an F doesn't make sense because that just kind of means they just picked a bunch of guys like, that were terrible or just guys that all had injury or off the field issues, overdrafting, but they overdrafted a lot and they did not address their number one need at all. And they addressed a need in the second round with an overdraft of that they didn't have. They don't need another running back. They've got 2 adequate running backs on their roster. You don't need 3. You don't need, you had 1 awesome running back, a second pretty good running back. You don't need a 3rd young running back to develop behind those 2. I just think that, I don't want to be like too over the top, but it feels like a D. It feels like a D. I don't want to go D- because that feels so aggressive, but it feels like you can't say it's not a D. Even if Love hits, this draft couldn't possibly be an A because, drafting 1 good quarterback is awesome and helps your franchise out. But I'm telling you right now, we are not going to remember any of these other guys from this draft. It's there's no way, because that would mean that LaFleur keeps a fucking job, which he won't.
Yeah, I think LaFleur is definitely trying to build the running back committee that steamrolled them in both games that they played the Niners this season. That's clearly what they're trying to do. Jamal Williams is clearly underutilized. Who's definitely, as you put it, adequate. And, I know you didn't want to be too harsh on Green Bay, but Pro Football Focus gave him a D. Sporting News gave him a D. CBS Sports gave him a D. USA Today gave them a D. Roto World gave them an F. Walter Football gave them an F. The Washington Post gave them a D. NFL.com gave them a C minus. Established the Run gave them an F. The New York Post gave them a C. I mean, Green Bay's got some pretty bad grade. Nothing is above a C here.
Yeah, it's not a good draft. It's not a good draft. I feel like, I reserve Fs for like trading away all your picks for Ricky Williams. Like, I feel like that's like what it's reserved for.
Yeah, that's
but so I feel like you can't give him an F because that just feels so dramatic and almost like you're trying to like roast a terrible movie. But like, it's not good because they overdrafted for everything. They overdrafted for almost every one of their important picks. And some people might end up working out. I was being hyperbolic by saying that, no one's going to know any of these guys. But still, it just feels like from, a strict value standpoint, they did not understand value. And I think it has to do with the fact that the Packers are such an old school organization. They've always been old school. And I think that that'll be a weird, interesting dynamic between someone like LaFleur, who is trained from a very new school method, and their front office, which, Ted Thompson has always been addressing the draft. No one wants to sign here because we're in Green Bay, Wisconsin. No one wants to go to Green Bay. And it's just like, I don't know. I mean, and even this is another thing I think I texted too in the group chat. He even looks like he's trying to be Kyle Shanahan. It's so uncomfortable to see. It just feels like everybody else needs to understand that he is not even hiding how much he just wants to be the Niners. And as we all know, no one ever wins by being a knockoff. You have to create your own thing, and then it works out. No one's going to be the next McVay. No one's going to be the next Shanahan. No one's going to be the next Mahomes. No one's going to do that. You have to be your own thing and be a new thing. You have to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Any final thoughts, Ray?
Good luck, Green Bay. No, that was it. I think Green Bay's got a tough road ahead of them, and I'm not sure if LaFleur is going to have a long tenure over there in Green Bay.
I'm not even sure if Sean McVay is going to have a long tenure in L.A., and I think he's a better coach. I'm not entirely considering how long they put up with what's his name? Oh, gosh, I can't believe I'm running a blank. What's his name?
Mike McCarthy.
No. The Rams did with the previous.
Jeff Fisher.
Considering how long they put up with Jeff Fisher, that's probably his saving grace. But if they end up back in fourth place, if they end up in fourth place this season, I don't know, man. I don't know. I think Jared Goff probably goes before Sean McVay, but I feel like that team is definitely on the hot seat.
I think so. I mean, trading away your future in an attempt to win a Super Bowl now, I've never been a fan of that philosophy.
No, but to their credit, they had about as good of a draft as you can have with about as terrible preparation and amount of picks that you can have. So I give them credit. They found great value. I like a lot of their draft picks. You know, I still think that we're going to find out that they're pulling an Al Davis, Raiders maneuver where they're just so out of money that they're just trying to find a way. And McVay, I think, is going to leave, not because he gets fired, but because he leaves.
That's right. I remember you saying that. You said that on the last episode. And you know what? I would not argue that hypothesis. I would not. That actually sounds as much in play as anything else. I think there's a good chance that happens too.
Yeah, and then also prediction: Aaron Rodgers is going to be a Bear in the next 3 years. So I'm excited for when that happens. It's going to be when no one trades for him because he will not play for the Packers, and I am so excited for that. So I'm making predictions, making bold statements.
It's what you're here for, buddy. All right, hey Max, thank you so much for coming on, man. That was awesome. We definitely have to get you back on again soon, and good luck with the rest of the offseason, and hopefully all of our teams, hopefully we can get back to weird, inexplicable 49ers Bears games, because there's some of my favorites that happen when they do. So hopefully we can get back to that very soon in any way, shape, or form. The country needs it.
Oh yeah. And if we don't, I'll just I don't know, I'll just cry, I guess. I don't know what I'll do. I'll probably just have to finally have a conversation with my girlfriend, which feels like that doesn't happen with football. So man, that's a crazy time.
All right, guys, we'll be back a little bit later on. We've got a couple gold dives with Candlestick. We'll be on the lookout for those. And so concludes another edition of the GoldCast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy Solis III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Solis the First, baby.
Boom! We'll see you next time. Same GoldCast time, same GoldCast channel.
This is the GoldCast.